In a routine traffic stop, Officer Ryan Brooks confronts David Green, a young man driving an expensive car through a neighborhood Ryan deems troubled. Despite David's calm and respectful demeanor, Ryan's suspicions lead to an uncomfortable exchange. The next day, Ryan is stunned to find David is the new police chief, and is even more shocked to learn that David's father was wrongfully convicted in a case Ryan had a hand in. As Ryan faces the repercussions of his actions, he must navigate the difficult path of accountability and redemption. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. The encounter Officer Ryan Brooks had been patrolling the same neighborhood for years, a place he had come to view as a haven for trouble. Over time, his experiences had fostered a certain skepticism and wariness about the area. To him, the presence of an expensive car in that particular neighborhood was inherently suspicious, especially if it didn't conform to his preconceived notions of what kind of person should be driving such a vehicle. This bias was why, when he spotted the sleek, black Tesla idling at a stop sign, he wasted no time in acting on his hunch. With his police lights flashing, Ryan pulled his patrol car up behind the Tesla and immediately issued a directive for the driver to pull over. License and registration, Ryan commanded abruptly, bypassing any form of courteous greeting. His voice was marked by a chill, carrying an unmistakable edge of contempt. The driver, a young black man dressed in a meticulously tailored business suit, displayed an unperturbed demeanor. Without a trace of agitation, he calmly retrieved his documents from the glove compartment and handed them over to Ryan. His gaze was steady and unflinching, meeting Ryan's eyes directly. "Good morning, officer," he said, his voice composed yet assertive. Ryan made no effort to reciprocate the greeting. Instead, he snatched the documents from the young man's hand and began to scrutinize them with an air of distrust. He hoped to uncover some discrepancy or anomaly that would validate his suspicion that the young man did not fit the profile of someone who should be driving such a high-end car. David Green, Ryan muttered to himself as he read the name on the driver's license. "What are you doing around here? Is this car yours?" "Yes, sir," David responded with a polite and measured tone. "I'm en route to an important business meeting." "A meeting, you say?" Ryan's gaze sharpened as he looked up from the documents, a sarcastic smirk forming on his lips. "And what kind of meeting might that be? In a neighborhood like this, driving a car like this?" The contempt in Ryan's voice was palpable, laden with an unspoken judgment. David, however, remained unfazed. "It's a business meeting, sir. If you'd like, you can verify the details by calling the number on the business card attached to my license." Ryan glanced briefly at the business card but made no move to follow up. Instead, he leaned closer to the window, his expression hardening. "Do you think I'm a fool?" he demanded, his tone dripping with menace. "You think I don't know when something doesn't add up? A young man like you, driving a luxury car in this neighborhood, you must be up to something." "I don't think anything of the sort," Sir David replied, his demeanor still calm and collected. "I understand you're doing your job, but I assure you there's nothing amiss here." Ryan responded with a dry, humorless laugh. "Oh, you're quite the clever one, aren't you? One of those young folks who think they can buy respect with their money. But not with me. I know your type, thinking you're somehow superior to everyone else. But deep down, you're all the same. Just troublemakers." "With all due respect," Sir David said, his voice remaining steady and respectful, "I believe you're mistaken. I'm merely trying to get to my meeting. There's no reason to prolong this." Ryan felt a surge of irritation and frustration. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, particularly not in such a composed and direct manner. He stared at David, searching for any sign of fear or vulnerability, but found none. The young man's calm demeanor was unshakable, leaving Ryan with nothing but his unresolved suspicions and the unsettling realization that his prejudices had been confronted head-on. Finally, without uttering another word, Ryan brusquely shoved the stack of documents back toward David. His frustration was palpable, and his voice cut through the air with a chilling edge of anger. "Get out of here before I change my mind," he growled, his tone steely and unforgiving. David, unfazed by the cold reception, calmly adjusted his sunglasses and nodded with a hint of respect. He turned on his heel and made his way to his sleek Tesla, the hum of its engine beginning to purr as he started the car. "Have a good day, officer," he said, his voice smooth and composed. He drove away, leaving Ryan standing alone on the curb. As David's car receded into the distance, Ryan felt a mounting dissatisfaction gnawing at him, an unshakable discomfort that seemed to grow with every passing second. Ryan stood there, watching as the Tesla vanished from view, his mind grappling with an uneasy feeling he couldn't quite place. Everything about the encounter, David's calm demeanor, his unshakable posture, the way he carried himself without an ounce of fear or subservience troubled Ryan more than he was willing to admit. It was as if David had managed to bypass all of Ryan's defenses with a mere look, leaving him feeling inexplicably unsettled. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The next morning, Ryan arrived at the precinct, his footsteps echoing through the otherwise quiet, familiar halls. An unusual buzz filled the air, an almost palpable excitement that seemed to electrify the atmosphere. His colleagues, usually so focused and reserved, were animatedly discussing the arrival of the new police chief. Their chatter was filled with speculation and enthusiasm, a stark contrast to the usual humdrum of daily routines. Just another bureaucrat, Ryan thought dismissively to himself. He had witnessed countless chiefs come and go, each one promising sweeping changes that rarely materialized. To him, it didn't matter much who occupied the chief's office. He intended to keep doing his job his way, regardless of who was in charge. As Ryan entered the briefing room, his eyes widened in shock. There, standing before the assembled officers with an air of calm authority, was the new police chief, David Green, the very same young man he had humiliated the day before. A wave of disbelief hit Ryan with the force of a lightning bolt. He locked eyes with David, who was impeccably dressed in an elegant suit, his expression serene and untainted by any sign of resentment. David briefly glanced at Ryan before addressing the team. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady and commanding. "It's a pleasure to be here and to work with such an experienced team. I'm aware of the depth of knowledge each of you possesses and am eager to learn from all of you." David's words echoed in Ryan's mind, but he could barely focus. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and turmoil. How could the young man he had so recently belittled and dismissed now be his superior? The implications of this unexpected turn of events were overwhelming, leaving Ryan with a sinking feeling of uncertainty about what this new dynamic meant for his future. As the meeting drew to a close, Ryan tried to make a hasty exit, only to be interrupted by an unexpected summons. Officer Brooks, David's voice rang out, halting Ryan in his tracks. "I'd like to have a word with you in my office, please." Ryan's throat tightened, and a bead of sweat formed on his forehead. "Of course, sir," he managed to reply, his voice betraying a nervous edge. He followed David down the corridor, each step amplifying his growing anxiety. In David's office, David gestured to a chair positioned in front of his desk. Ryan sat down, deliberately avoiding eye contact, while David calmly perused some documents. The silence in the room was thick and oppressive. Finally, David broke the quiet. "There's something you should know, Ryan," he said, handing over a dossier. Ryan's hands were slightly unsteady as he accepted the file. As he flipped through the pages, a sinking sensation overtook him. The dossier contained details of a case from 15 years ago, one in which Ryan had been deeply involved. It was a high-profile drug bust that resulted in the arrest of Samuel Green, a black man with no prior criminal record. Despite the circumstantial nature of the evidence against Samuel, Ryan had been resolute in his belief of the man's guilt, and the court had followed his lead, leading to Samuel's conviction and a 15-year prison sentence. Ryan's heart raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. This was no ordinary case, it was the very one that had haunted him, and now it was directly linked to the new police chief standing before him. Ryan's heart pounded with a relentless rhythm as he continued to read through the document. The trial had been a significant turning point in his career, one that had shaped his professional journey in ways he hadn't fully appreciated until now. Samuel had consistently and fervently proclaimed his innocence, yet Ryan had remained steadfast in his conviction of Samuel's guilt. It was a case that had, in many ways, defined him, and he had believed with unwavering certainty that justice had been served. But as he delved deeper into the details of the document, a horrifying truth emerged: Samuel had been innocent all along. The gravity of the situation became even more apparent when David spoke. His voice, though calm, was tinged with a deep, resonant pain that made each word hit with a force far beyond mere verbal communication. "That man you arrested was my father," David said, his tone steady but betraying an undercurrent of deep sorrow. "You destroyed his life and, by extension, ruined mine." The impact of David's revelation struck Ryan with a profound intensity. It was as if he had been physically struck by the weight of his actions. He sat there, frozen, unable to muster a coherent response. The realization that the man he had played a role in convicting the man whose life had been utterly dismantled by the judicial system was David's father was a devastating blow. "I didn't know," Ryan stammered, his voice breaking and faltering as he tried to regain his composure. The authoritative demeanor he had once carried with such confidence and ease had evaporated, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. "I was just following the evidence, I thought." "You thought wrong," David cut in, his calm tone now edged with a sharpness that underscored his deep frustration. "It wasn't merely a matter of following the evidence. Ryan, you overlooked the truth. Your conviction of my father's guilt blinded you to the reality of the situation. My father spent 15 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. 15 years taken from him, years that could never be reclaimed. His reputation was utterly destroyed, our family was torn apart, and now you will have to face the consequences of your actions." The enormity of David's words weighed heavily on Ryan. He struggled to process the full implications of what he was hearing. But the enormity of the truth was almost too much to bear. The case that had once been a source of professional pride now loomed over him as a stark symbol of his failures. He had been so confident in his decisions back then, so sure that he was on the side of justice. Now, confronted with the devastating reality of his mistakes, he saw just how profoundly he had been blinded by his certainty. "I never meant," Ryan began to explain, but David raised a hand to cut him off. "I'm not here for your excuses," David said firmly, his voice resolute. "I'm not here seeking apologies. I'm here because things are going to change. You and others like you have managed to escape real accountability for far too long. The system has shielded you and allowed you to continue operating without facing true consequences. But that ends now." David leaned in, his eyes locked onto Ryan's with an unyielding intensity. "From this moment on, we will meticulously review every case you've ever been involved in, beginning with my father's. We will examine every complaint lodged against you and scrutinize every instance where you may have crossed ethical lines. If we uncover any misconduct, there will be severe repercussions. And make no mistake, Ryan, we will find something." Ryan's mouth went dry, and he felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He had always believed that his long tenure and the loyalty he had cultivated within the department would protect him from serious scrutiny. But now, the prospect of a thorough and unforgiving investigation shattered that illusion. The image of his career, the legacy he had built with such care, seemed to crumble into dust before his eyes. "I understand," Ryan managed to whisper, his voice barely audible and laced with a deep sense of resignation. "I will cooperate fully with the investigation." David's nod was slow and deliberate, his face an impassive mask. "Good. Because this situation isn't solely about you, Ryan. It's about rectifying a broken system. It's about accountability, something you've managed to avoid for far too long." Ryan remained seated, a profound silence hanging between them. His mind was a whirlwind of fear, regret, and disbelief. For years, he had prided himself on being a tough, no-nonsense cop, someone who could handle any challenge and always get the job done. But now, for the first time in his career, he was being forced to confront the full weight of his actions. The reality of what he had done, the lives he had affected, the harm he had inflicted was becoming increasingly clear. David rose from his chair, signaling that their conversation was coming to an end. "You're free to leave now, Officer Brooks, but remember, this isn't over. We'll be in touch." Ryan stood slowly, his legs feeling weak and unsteady. He made his way toward the door with a sense of dread, his mind racing as he walked out of David's office and down the dimly lit hallway. Every step seemed to echo the uncertainty of his future. One thing was certain: his life had irrevocably changed, and he was on a path he couldn't yet see the end of. Once he was in his car, Ryan sat in silence, staring blankly through the windshield. The enormity of what had just transpired began to sink in, overwhelming him. The once confident and assertive officer, who had always seen the world in stark contrasts of right and wrong, now felt adrift in a murky sea of gray. The man he had wronged, the person whose life he had contributed to destroying, was now his superior, and there was no escaping the consequences of his past actions. His thoughts drifted back to a fateful day 15 years earlier. He recalled the intensity of that drug bust, the pressure from his superiors to make arrests, the community's demand for swift justice. It had been a chaotic time, and Ryan, still relatively new to the force, had been eager to prove himself. Samuel Green had seemed like a convenient target, an unfortunate individual in the wrong place at the wrong time. At that moment, Ryan had convinced himself of Samuel's guilt, disregarding any doubts or evidence to the contrary. The case had been a high-profile success, and Ryan's career had soared as a result. But now, sitting in his car, Ryan realized the gravity of his mistake. Samuel had been an innocent man, ensnared by a system that prioritized expediency over truth, and Ryan had been a complicit part of that system, blindly enforcing its flawed rules without questioning the damage he was causing. A deep sense of guilt washed over him. He had never fully comprehended the far-reaching effects of his actions before. He had always seen himself as a protector of the law, someone who maintained order and safety. But now, he saw the other side, the lives he had shattered, the families he had torn apart. For the first time, Ryan felt the crushing weight of those lives pressing heavily upon him. The drive home was a blur of emotions and confusion. When Ryan finally pulled into his driveway, he felt utterly drained, both physically and emotionally. Linda, his wife, met him at the door, immediately sensing that something was gravely wrong. "Ryan, what's happened?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. Ryan looked at her, his eyes hollow and brimming with despair. "I made a terrible mistake, Linda," he said, his voice breaking. "A mistake that has caused a lot of damage." They sat together at the kitchen table, and Ryan recounted everything, details of the traffic stop, the confrontation with David Green, and the painful realization that he had wrongfully arrested David's father many years ago. As Ryan spoke, Linda listened quietly, her face a mixture of shock and sadness. "I don't know what to do," Ryan said finally, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know how to make this right." Linda reached out, gently taking his hand. Her voice was soft but resolute. "You can't change what's happened in the past, Ryan, but you can begin to make amends." Ryan looked up at her, his eyes filled with doubt. "How? How do I atone for something like this?" "I don't have all the answers," Linda admitted, "but the first step is to accept responsibility. You need to be willing to face whatever comes next with honesty and courage." Ryan nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling in. There was no escaping the reality of his actions. All he could do now was confront the consequences and strive to make things right, no matter how difficult the journey ahead might be. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The weeks that followed were some of the most grueling and challenging Ryan had ever faced. The internal investigation into his past cases had launched with relentless vigor, scrutinizing every arrest he had made over the years for any signs of misconduct. Each detail, each decision he had made, was under the microscope. What had once been his pride and joy, his work as a police officer, was now being dissected and questioned, casting a long shadow over his career. The colleagues who had once been his allies, his support system, now regarded him with increasing suspicion and wariness. The camaraderie that had once characterized the precinct was replaced by a palpable tension. Ryan could almost feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on him every time he walked through the precinct doors. Their glances, their hushed conversations, and their subtle avoidance spoke volumes about their current sentiments toward him. David Green, a fellow officer, remained outwardly professional throughout the ordeal. He never allowed any personal animosity to surface, maintaining a demeanor of formal courtesy. However, the undercurrent of tension between David and Ryan was unmistakable. Ryan often found himself wondering if David was silently biding his time, waiting for the moment when the investigation would inevitably lead to the collapse of Ryan's career. As the days dragged on, Ryan felt an ever-deepening sense of isolation and confusion. His identity had been intricately tied to his role as a police officer. He had built his entire life around the belief that he was a guardian of justice, a protector of the innocent. But now, that fundamental belief had been shattered. The certainty that once defined him had dissolved into a sea of doubt and self-questioning. He was adrift, struggling to understand who he was and what his purpose might be now. The day arrived when the results of the investigation were finally set to be revealed. Ryan sat at his desk, his nerves frayed as he tapped a pen rhythmically against a stack of old case files. The precinct was eerily silent, holding its collective breath in anticipation of the outcome. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on Ryan, his career and his very identity hanging in the balance. For weeks, a dedicated team of auditors had meticulously examined every aspect of his past cases. They had reviewed every arrest, scrutinized every complaint filed against him, and dissected every piece of evidence. The atmosphere in the precinct was thick with apprehension, occasionally interrupted by murmurs of officers discussing the investigation. As Ryan waited, his mind was a whirlwind of reflections. He replayed every questionable decision he had made, every moment when his gut told him to pause and reconsider, but he had pressed forward. In those moments, he had prided himself on being decisive, and quick to act. Yet, now he recognized that many of those decisions had been guided by bias rather than a genuine pursuit of justice. Finally, Captain Roberts, Ryan's commanding officer, approached him with a somber expression. David Green stood silently behind him, his face a mask of unreadable professionalism. Officer Brooks, Captain Roberts began, his voice steady and measured. "We have completed our review of your cases. Please come with me." Ryan rose slowly from his seat, his stomach a tight knot of anxiety. The walk to the conference room felt agonizingly slow, each step echoing the gravity of the moment. Upon entering the room, Ryan was met with a panel of senior officers and legal advisors, their faces set in stern, impassive expressions. David Green took a seat among them, his professional demeanor unwavering. "Officer Brooks," began one of the panel members, his tone grave, "we have thoroughly reviewed your record and the complaints lodged against you over the years. What we have uncovered is deeply troubling." Ryan's heart raced, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. He had braced himself for this moment, but hearing the allegations articulated in such a formal setting made them painfully real. "There are numerous instances where you failed to adhere to proper procedures," the panel member continued. "Many of your arrests were conducted on dubious grounds, and in several cases, evidence was either mishandled or disregarded. Most notably, the arrest of Samuel Green, which led to a wrongful conviction, stands out as the most severe example of misconduct. You ignored exculpatory evidence, coerced witnesses, and neglected to conduct a thorough investigation. These actions have not only caused significant harm to individuals, but have also severely eroded public trust in this department." The weight of their words was crushing. Ryan had always known there was a possibility that his past might catch up with him, but he had never anticipated facing such stark accountability. I made mistakes," Ryan confessed, his voice trembling with emotion. "I didn't realize at the time. I thought I was doing the right thing." David, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward, his gaze fixed intently on Ryan. "It wasn't just a mistake. Officer Brooks, you were part of a system that systematically overlooked certain people. Your actions were guided by personal biases rather than a commitment to justice. Because of your decisions, innocent lives were irreparably harmed. My father spent 15 years in prison due to your failures. There is no justification for that." If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 3 below to let me know that you're still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. The room fell into a heavy silence as David's words hung in the air, leaving Ryan to grapple with the profound impact of his actions and the irrevocable damage they had caused. Ryan's throat tightened with a vice-like grip as he absorbed David's words, each one cutting through him like shards of glass. The shame and guilt that surged through him were overwhelming, washing over him in waves that left him gasping for breath. For years, he had prided himself on being a steadfast protector of justice, a beacon of truth in a world riddled with deceit. But now, as the stark reality of the situation unfolded before him, he was forced to confront a painful and undeniable truth: he had been complicit in perpetuating the very injustice he had vowed to combat. The head of the panel, a stern figure with a grave demeanor, cleared his throat with an air of finality before continuing. "Given the gravity and severity of the findings presented, the department is left with no alternative but to impose disciplinary action. Effective immediately, you will be placed on indefinite suspension. Furthermore, we are compelled to recommend that your case be forwarded to the district attorney for potential criminal prosecution concerning the wrongful conviction of Sumerian." The impact of the panel head's words hit Ryan like a sledgehammer. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and cold. The suspension had been a possibility he had braced himself for, but the prospect of facing criminal charges was something he had never anticipated. It felt as though his entire world was collapsing in on itself, disintegrating into a chaos of shattered dreams and broken promises. He opened his mouth, desperate to protest, to plead his case, but the words caught in his throat, refusing to emerge. "You will have an opportunity to defend yourself in court," one of the panel members stated, their tone as neutral as the sterile environment of the hearing room. "However, for the moment, you are dismissed." Ryan remained rooted to the spot, stunned into a state of numb disbelief as the weight of his predicament sank in. His career, his identity, and the life he had known were being irrevocably dismantled. He turned to leave, but his gaze fell on David, and he felt a surge of remorse. "I'm sorry," he managed to whisper, his voice trembling with emotion. "I'm truly sorry for everything." David met Ryan's gaze with a look of measured calm, though there was a faint trace of softness in his expression. "It's not me you need to apologize to, Officer Brooks. It's my father and all the others whose lives you've irreparably harmed." Ryan nodded, tears welling in his eyes and blurring his vision. "I'll do whatever it takes to make it right," he vowed, even as he knew deep down that no amount of effort could ever truly undo the damage he had inflicted. As he exited the precinct, surrendering his badge and gun, symbols of his former authority, Ryan was engulfed by a profound sense of emptiness. The loss he felt was more than the end of his career, it was a void that consumed his very essence. He had lost everything: his professional identity, his reputation, and the respect he once commanded from his peers. Yet, as he stepped into the cold, gray afternoon, he understood that this was merely the beginning of a far more daunting journey. The real test lay ahead in confronting those he had wronged and grappling with the relentless guilt that would shadow him for the rest of his life. Ryan Brooks found himself alone in his living room, the suspension letter crumpled in his trembling hand. He was on the cusp of embarking on a journey that promised to be the most grueling of his life, a quest for redemption that might never be fully achieved. But he also knew that this was a path he must walk, no matter how excruciating it would be. Years spent dismantling lives had brought him to this juncture. Now, he faced the formidable task of trying to piece them back together. But where should he begin? As he stared out of the window, the weight of David's words echoed in his mind. "It's not me you need to apologize to." Ryan realized that before he could move forward, he had to confront the shadows of his past. The following day, Ryan drove to the Green family's home with a heavy heart. Each mile felt like a journey into the depths of his regret. As he approached the front door, his heart pounded with anxiety, his hand trembling uncontrollably as he knocked. The door creaked open, revealing Samuel Green, now older and frailer than the man Ryan had wrongfully condemned all those years ago, yet still exuding a resilience that spoke of his enduring spirit. Ryan took a deep, shuddering breath, struggling to find the right words to convey the depth of his remorse. "Mr. Green," he began, his voice wavering and barely audible, "I realize that I can never undo the damage I've done, but I need you to understand just how profoundly sorry I am. I acknowledge that an apology alone is insufficient, but I want you to know that I am willing to do whatever it takes to make amends for my actions." Samuel Green's gaze was intense, a complex mixture of emotions reflected in his eyes. There was palpable anger, a deep sorrow that seemed to weigh heavily on him, and perhaps a faint glimmer of forgiveness, though it was not easily discernible. "Come inside, Officer Brooks," Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying a subdued authority. "We need to discuss this further." As Ryan crossed the threshold into Samuel's home, he felt a profound weight on his shoulders, knowing that this conversation was merely the beginning of a series of difficult discussions he would have to face. This moment marked the start of a challenging journey toward redemption, a journey that would test everything he believed he understood about justice, forgiveness, and his own identity. In the conference room, David Green rose to address the group, his demeanor resolute. "This is only the beginning," he declared. "There are numerous officers who must be held accountable for their actions, and our efforts will not cease here. The entire department needs a transformation, beginning with addressing the corruption and misconduct that has been allowed to persist for far too long." With that, the meeting concluded. Ryan was led out of the room, his badge and gun removed from his possession. He felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness, as if he had lost everything he had once held dear: his career, his reputation, and even his sense of self. Everything he had built was slipping through his fingers. As Ryan stepped out of the precinct, he cast a final glance back. The building had been his professional home for years, where he had forged his identity, but now it seemed like a distant, unattainable memory. Outside, the sun was setting, casting a warm orange hue over the city. Ryan stood there, immobilized by uncertainty, not knowing where to turn or what steps to take next. His entire existence had revolved around his role as an officer, and now, with that identity stripped away, he was confronted with a profound sense of disorientation. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly lost. The weeks that followed Ryan's suspension were marked by an overwhelming blur of uncertainty and dread. His once prideful home now felt like a confining prison. The news of his suspension had spread like wildfire, and he could sense the critical stares and whispers from his neighbors each time he ventured outside. Linda, his steadfast partner, remained by his side, but her eyes betrayed the sadness she felt. The man she had once admired and believed in was now a mere shadow of his former self. Ryan's days were consumed by a relentless cycle of introspection and regret. He replayed the events of the past 15 years repeatedly in his mind, grappling with the question of how different choices might have altered the course of his life. He pondered the impact of his actions on countless lives, with Samuel Green's suffering being the most vivid and painful in his thoughts. The weight of guilt pressed down on him like an immovable boulder, suffocating and relentless. One afternoon, a knock at the door startled Ryan. When he opened it, he was taken aback to see David Green standing there alone, devoid of the authoritative presence he had exhibited during their previous meetings. The two men locked eyes for a moment, each silently grappling with their emotions. "I came to talk," David said eventually, his voice soft but resolute. Ryan stepped aside, inviting him in. They settled in the living room, the atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. Ryan waited, unsure of what to say or how to even begin expressing his remorse. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. "I didn't come here seeking an apology," David stated, seemingly addressing Ryan's unspoken thoughts. "I don't believe that's sufficient. What happened cannot be undone. My father's life, my family's life, they have been irrevocably altered by your actions. But this situation isn't solely about you and me. It's about addressing and correcting the systemic issues." Ryan stared at David, his surprise evident. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice heavy with strain. David leaned forward, his eyes locked onto Ryan with a penetrating intensity that conveyed both urgency and a hint of vulnerability. "I need your help to instigate real and meaningful change," he said, his voice carrying a weight of determination. "You've been entrenched in this system for years. You understand its complexities, its flaws, and crucially, you know where it has faltered. If we are to correct these failures and truly transform things for the better, I need someone who grasps the full scope of the problem, someone with first-hand experience of how things operate behind the scenes." Ryan blinked, momentarily taken aback by David's unexpected request. The last thing he had anticipated was being asked for assistance. He had prepared himself for a confrontation, perhaps even a harsh judgment, but this plea for help was entirely outside his expectations. "I don't understand," Ryan said, his confusion evident. "Given everything that's transpired, why would you seek my help? After all, you have every reason to hold a grudge against me." David's shoulders slumped slightly as he sighed deeply. The exhaustion of the ongoing struggle seemed to weigh heavily on him, because real change isn't achieved merely by doling out punishment or exacting revenge. True transformation comes from understanding the root causes of the problems and addressing them at their core. You've been deeply involved in the system's failures, Ryan, but that involvement also gives you unique insights that could be crucial in fixing it. If you're willing to confront your past and help me address these issues, you could play a vital role in creating a solution. Ryan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing to process the enormity of David's proposal. This was a far cry from the anticipated confrontation. He had envisioned David coming to exact retribution, to remind him of every mistake he had made. Instead, David was extending an olive branch, offering him a chance not to erase the past but to engage in something constructive and redemptive. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this," Ryan said quietly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I've made so many errors, caused so much harm. I don't even know where to begin making amends." David's gaze remained steady, unwavering as he looked at Ryan. "Start by facing the truth of what you've done. Acknowledge your mistakes openly. Then, help me ensure that such wrongs are not repeated. We need to identify and address the systemic issues that allowed these injustices to occur." The room fell into a heavy silence as Ryan absorbed David's words. This was an opportunity, not to erase his past, but to engage in meaningful work moving forward, to take responsibility and attempt to repair the damage he had inflicted. The gravity of this change was not lost on him. After a long pause, Ryan finally nodded, a flicker of resolve and determination breaking through his uncertainty. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "I'll help." David stood up and extended his hand, his gesture symbolizing a new beginning. "Then let's get to work." As Ryan grasped David's hand, he felt the weight of his past mistakes pressing down on him. Yet, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he also experienced a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to make amends and contribute to a meaningful change. The road to redemption. In the subsequent days, Ryan threw himself into a whirlwind of meetings and discussions with David and his team. Their objective was clear: to thoroughly analyze the failures within the police force and implement sweeping reforms to prevent future injustices. Ryan was assigned the formidable and emotionally taxing task of reviewing old cases, particularly those where officers, including himself, had compromised or violated rules to secure convictions. The work proved to be an exhausting journey, both mentally and emotionally. Every case file he opened was a jarring reminder of the errors he had made and the lives he had impacted. It felt as if he were peeling back the layers of his conscience, exposing painful truths he had long buried beneath a veneer of authority and control. Among the numerous cases, one stood out starkly: Marcus Henderson. Marcus had been arrested 5 years earlier on dubious drug charges. Like Samuel Green, Marcus had consistently maintained his innocence, yet the evidence against him, although tenuous, had been sufficient for a conviction. Ryan had been the arresting officer in this case. As Ryan meticulously reviewed Marcus's file, he was struck by the disturbing similarities to Samuel's case. The same glaring gaps in evidence, the same rushed and incomplete investigation. It became painfully clear to Ryan that Marcus, too, had likely been wrongfully convicted, another victim of a deeply flawed system. With hands trembling from a mix of guilt and resolve, Ryan closed the file. While he knew he could not undo the past, he felt a strong compulsion to rectify this particular injustice. Determined, he carried the file to David, ready to confront the reality of his actions. "I believe we need to reopen this case," Ryan said, his voice heavy with the burden of his conscience. David took the file and examined it with a discerning eye before looking back at Ryan. "Are you sure about this?" Ryan met David's gaze with unwavering conviction. "I'm sure. I made mistakes. This young man, he's likely innocent, just like your father was." David reviewed the file with a neutral expression. "We'll look into it," he said, his tone reserved. He wasn't ready to offer forgiveness, but Ryan wasn't seeking that. What Ryan was asking for was justice, a chance to make things right. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 5 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. Reopening old wounds. Reopening the Marcus Henderson case was a daunting and complex endeavor. The district attorney's office had been particularly hesitant to revisit old convictions, especially those that had been considered resolved and closed with a seemingly clear-cut conclusion at the time. However, with David's unwavering support and the mounting evidence of misconduct in Ryan's arrest record, they reluctantly agreed to take a fresh look at the case. As the investigation progressed, the true extent of the miscarriage of justice became increasingly evident. Marcus Henderson had been railroaded in a case that had initially appeared straightforward, but was now revealed to be riddled with corruption and misconduct. Witnesses who had previously testified against Marcus began to recant their statements, admitting that they had been coerced and pressured by the police to implicate him unjustly. The physical evidence that had been crucial to convicting Marcus was now shown to be flimsy and circumstantial at best. In several instances, it became clear that evidence had been outright fabricated by officers eager to close the case quickly and without regard for the truth. The more Ryan delved into the details of the case, the more he was overcome with revulsion and self-disgust. This was not merely an isolated mistake, but indicative of a disturbing pattern, one marked by a rush to judgment, a willingness to cut corners, and a pervasive bias that tainted the pursuit of justice. It was not just a matter of one corrupt officer; the entire department had been complicit in these systemic injustices. Ryan came to a sobering realization that the issues ran far deeper than his failures. They were embedded in the very fabric of the department's practices and culture. The case eventually made its way back to the courts, and with the introduction of new evidence, Marcus was granted a retrial. The judge, upon reviewing the fresh evidence, vacated Marcus's wrongful conviction. Although Marcus was finally freed, the years he had spent behind bars could never be returned to him. The damage inflicted upon his life was irreparable. Ryan watched with a heavy heart as Marcus exited the courtroom. Marcus's face was a complex mix of relief and bitterness, reflecting the deep scars left by his wrongful incarceration. Outside the courthouse, Ryan approached Marcus, grappling with the enormity of the damage he had caused. He was uncertain of what words could convey the depth of his remorse. "I'm sorry," Ryan said quietly, his voice fraught with emotion. "I know that words can't undo the harm I've caused, but I am truly sorry." Marcus regarded him with an unreadable expression. For a moment, Ryan hoped for some acknowledgement or response, but instead, Marcus merely nodded and walked away. Ryan remained there, feeling the weight of his actions pressing down on him more acutely than ever. The path to redemption seemed daunting and uncertain, and the possibility of forgiveness appeared distant and elusive. Changing the system. The Henderson case was merely the beginning of a broader and more challenging journey. In the year that followed, David and Ryan embarked on a comprehensive effort to reform the department's procedures and practices. The focus was on overhauling the system to address the deep-seated issues that had been uncovered. New training programs were introduced, emphasizing bias awareness, de-escalation techniques, and improved community engagement. Officers were mandated to participate in regular seminars on racial justice and civil rights. Additionally, new oversight mechanisms were established to ensure greater accountability within the department. Ryan's role in these reforms was inherently complex. He was far from being the hero of this narrative. In fact, he was now seen as the emblem of what had gone awry. His presence served as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the consequences of systemic failures and personal biases. Yet, through his willingness to confront his errors and work towards genuine reform, Ryan discovered a renewed sense of purpose. He dedicated countless hours to meeting with community leaders, listening intently to their concerns, and striving to understand the profound pain caused by decades of mistrust and abuse. This process was far from easy. Many members of the community still viewed him with hostility and skepticism, and in many ways, rightfully so. Nevertheless, Ryan persisted in his efforts, consistently showing up, actively listening, and engaging with the community. Gradually, and with considerable effort, some began to see him not just as a symbol of past wrongs, but as a potential ally in the ongoing struggle for justice. Linda observed a profound transformation in Ryan as well. The man who had once been consumed by guilt and regret had evolved into someone driven by a new, purposeful resolve to make amends, to leverage his position for positive change, and to strive to be a better person than he had been before. This transformation extended into their personal lives. Their marriage, which had been on the brink of dissolution, began to heal. The emotional distance between them narrowed, and they discovered a newfound strength and connection in each other. If you are still watching this video and find these stories useful, please comment number 6 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Thank you for your valuable time. A glimmer of hope. As the reforms began to take root, the department started to show signs of transformation. The hiring of new officers who mirrored the diverse makeup of the community they served marked the beginning of a significant shift. Long-standing practices and ingrained habits which had once perpetuated a cycle of injustice were gradually dismantled. The journey toward change was far from complete, and the road ahead was still steep and fraught with challenges. Yet, amidst these incremental improvements, a glimmer of hope emerged. Ryan understood that he could never fully escape the shadow of his past. The lives he had disrupted, the trust he had shattered, these would forever be woven into the fabric of his story. The weight of his actions, the scars left behind, would always be a part of him. However, as he faced this reality, he found solace in the fact that he had a new chapter to write. This chapter was not defined by his previous mistakes, but by his pursuit of redemption, his efforts to amend the wrongs, and his determination to leave the world in a better state than he had found it. One serene evening, Ryan and Linda found themselves on their porch, watching as the sun dipped slowly below the horizon. The sky was ablaze with hues of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over everything. Linda reached out and took Ryan's hand in hers, her touch gentle and reassuring. "You've come a long way," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth and affection. Ryan turned his gaze from the sunset to her, a contemplative look in his eyes. "We both have," he replied, acknowledging the shared journey of growth and healing they had embarked upon. Linda squeezed his hand, a tender smile gracing her lips. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice imbued with genuine pride. Ryan's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Proud of me," he echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "For not giving up," she clarified, "for fighting to be a better man." Ryan was momentarily at a loss for words. The depth of her support and the sincerity of her sentiment overwhelmed him. Without saying another word, he leaned in and placed a soft kiss on her cheek. It was a gesture of gratitude and acknowledgement of her unwavering support, her love, and the precious opportunity to begin anew. As the last remnants of daylight faded and twilight enveloped the world, Ryan felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. He was acutely aware that the road ahead would be fraught with difficulties, and that the quest for redemption was a long and arduous path. Yet, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he sensed that he was moving in the right direction. And in that moment, amid the quiet serenity of the evening, that sense of progress was more than enough. Thank you for joining us today and exploring the powerful lessons we've shared. What have you learned from this story about accountability, understanding, and the consequences of our actions? Please share one key insight or takeaway you've gained and how you plan to apply it in your own life in the comments below. If you like this video, please leave your comment. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more thought-provoking content. Your support helps us continue to create meaningful and impactful videos. Thank you for being part of our community.